Hi, my name is Kim Brassler, and I am your host of One Voice Evolving podcast, where we pull back the curtain of DEI and have guests that are raw, real, and relatable. Have you ever been told you were too much, too intense, too sensitive, too emotional, too passionate, too driven, too smart, too sensual, too needy, too ambitious, too fat, too bitchy, too honest, too pretty, too wild, too intimidating, or just high maintenance, or not enough? Based on the viral video that birthed the Too Much Woman movement, celebrating the Too Much Woman, written by Gina Hatzis, is available at Amazon, and the link will be at onevoiceevolving.com for you to access. Gina was named Top Inspirational Speaker by Speaker Slam in 2021 and was featured in a Los Angeles article as one of the 3 most important events to empower women in 2019, which is the year that I met her. We touched bases again recently on LinkedIn, and so this podcast was recorded the day after Answer the Call 2024 White Women's Call occurred, and we were both on that same call. It was a fascinating conversation, and I've picked the highlights out to share with you. Gina tells us that the power of the phoenix isn't just that it rose from the ashes, but that it was brave enough to set its own nest on fire. And the energy and the enthusiasm and the movement that is arising among women in our country right now is going to shift this planet. Be part of it. Gina's passion is contagious and her commitment is clear. And I hope that you will join us and like, share, subscribe, and send this to your friends. Put it on your social media. TikTok loves it. And just get the word out that we are in this together. This is a message whose time has come. So Gina Hatzis is our guest today, and I am so excited, Gina, to touch bases with you again. I did some work with you pre-pandemic. That was the last time, and I went to an event you did in New Hampshire, and you were even better in person than on that viral video I followed and was my mantra for the year before I met you. And I was so blessed to see you on LinkedIn and coming into that environment. And so I would love for you to just kind of bring us up to speed about pandemic to now. And then, of course, we shared space last night on the Answer the Call 2024. And I would love to float into that after we get to know you. Please tell us.
Thank you so much. What a joy to be in conversation with you, Kim, and with other women who are living intentionally. There's probably nothing I enjoy more, especially since I'm still having my morning coffee. So those 2 things in tandem, I would do it all day long. A little about me. So I'm also known as the Too Much Woman. Prior to 2018, I had a 25-year global speaking career where I focused on conscious communication and empowerment. And in 2018, I delivered a speech. I live in Toronto, Canada. I was invited to give a speech. I thought it was just like a local little speaking competition, with 50 people in a bar. But turns out that competition, when I won, that speech was shared on Facebook, and it went viral within a week to 50 million viewers. And that changed the trajectory of my life, quite accidentally, actually. And it birthed a book, it birthed a movement, and it birthed a global tour. And that was actually my master's degree in Too Much Woman. I delivered the speech from a really authentic place. I thought no one would understand it. Most of the women that I work with tell the story of not feeling enough. So I thought me telling the story of being a too much little girl, a too much woman who's been told her whole life that she was too sensitive, too emotional, too loud, too bold, too ambitious, physically taking up too much space, too voluptuous, all the ways that I was told that I was too much or wrong. I thought no one would understand because that wasn't the language that I had heard with the women that I had worked with. But what I'd learned since that time, once I really unpacked it, is that the story of being told we're too much is actually the opposite side of the same coin as being told that we're not enough. And so that's where the pandemic stepped in. I was in the European leg of my tour in Paris in 2020, March, and I came home, as we all did, thinking this was going to pass in a couple of weeks. And I ended up canceling my entire tour. And not only that, my entire career as a speaker, because there were no more stages. But what the gift was in that for me was the past few years now, since the pandemic hit, it's given me an opportunity to slow down and really sink into the learning of the Too Much Woman community and how we as women, and I think this is pivotal for our conversation today about what's going on politically, how we as women can use our too muchness to leverage our strengths, to celebrate how we are too much, and to actually let that lead so that we can make change in the world.
I love that. I love that. And it has taken me some years. Pandemic was very helpful because the same thing happened to me. I was doing women's retreats and I had 4 on the books for 2020. And I canceled the first one and said, oh, but we'll do September. And oh, but we'll do January. And by January, I was beginning to be exhausted from the not doing. And so it brought me to a lot of inner work and inner examination. And without the distractions, oh my goodness, when you only have your own voice in your head and you
it's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of scary. It's a double-edged sword for sure. Yeah.
did not realize how easily I used to distract from that voice. Shopping was my thing, eating was my thing. All of the pleasures of touching and feeling and distracting were taken away. Although I did learn to cook, it was something. So now, to be on the other side of it, we started this One Voice Evolving podcast. I went in November. I was my first live event with anybody, and I was a participant in November 2023, and that's when I met Dr. Nikki Lanier. And to be in the space of like-minded women, the energy was, it gives me chills. The energy was so good, and it had been so long. And to be on that call last night, to know that there were 136,000 of my people. And my people doesn't mean white. My people means, women who care, women who have a voice and are willing to take the risk to use it. And so I would love for you to guide us through the pivots and pitfalls of using your voice when maybe you're not used to that, and how to find the community that supports your voice.
There is nothing that brings me more joy than talking specifically about this topic. And I will tell you why personally, and then I'll tell you why, from a professional perspective. For me, I spent my entire childhood with chronic sore throats. In fact, more than my childhood, into my 20s, into my 30s. I was an otherwise very healthy child, but a couple of times a year, I would have a chronic sore throat, and it would be so bad that I'd have to get on medication. I couldn't swallow, I couldn't chew, I couldn't do anything. And it was just the oddest thing, because otherwise, like I said, I was extremely healthy. It wasn't until my 30s where I started to make the connection, looking at the work of Louise Hay and others, understanding that what was going on was I was swallowing my truth. The throat chakra. I literally was not speaking the truth of how I was feeling. I was afraid to speak up. I was hiding so much. I played into the good girl hand. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to belong. These are biological needs, right? And we don't want to make any of these wrong. They're vitally important. I think that what happens for a lot of women when we recognize that we've been people pleasers and we've been doormats and we've been just trying to be harmonious because we've been groomed to believe that that's what a good woman does. Once we wake up to that fact, a lot of us swing the pendulum to the other side and we say, well, screw that. I'm not, I don't give a, bleep, and I don't care what people think. And so sometimes when we have to make a change, we do swing the opposite side. But what we've come to recognize as we start to heal those parts of ourselves is that there's a space in the middle where we rest. And in this space, we recognize that we can't fight our biology, and we shouldn't fight our biology. We need community. We need safe places. And so back to your question about finding the voice, one part of that, yes, is really tuning into, as you said, during the pandemic, like without all the distractions, what do I have to say? What do I want to say? What's important to me? What are my core values? Not the core values passed down from my mom and dad or from my culture or from society that says this is what a woman should want and what should be important to her, but what's really important to me. That's where I start with my clients, like getting very clear. And from that place, when we want to have the courage to step up and talk, it's vitally important that we're surrounded by people who will hold us in that space. Because if we don't, and here's what a lot of women do, I work with so many brilliant women at the top of their game. They're so successful, they're on fire, but here's what we do. We self-help ourselves in solitude. We read the books, we take the classes, we listen to podcasts, and we do it like when we're driving in the car, we do it like late at night. But when we don't do it in community, what happens is we get this surge of inspiration and courage. And then we go out in the world and maybe we post something on social media, or maybe we say something at work, or we speak up in our relationship and we get our hands slapped. We get some criticism or someone pushes back, and then we start to shake. We retreat back to that little unhealed girl or that part of us that is so afraid, and we stop until we can start to build up the courage again, and then we try again. And so this is why community is vitally important. This is why that call last night that you were talking about is vitally important. This is why community of any sort, a community could be one, but we need to find safe spaces so that we can practice using the voice that we haven't used, so that we can get feedback in that, so that we can be supported, and so that we can have the courage. And this is probably the number one thing I'm going to say, the courage to take messy action. Most women are perfectionists. As little girls, the word perfect, like you're doing that perfectly, what a perfect job, is used way more than on little boys. And so women tend to be perfectionists in that we want to know that we are perfectly ready for that job before we apply for it, right? We have such a high standard for ourselves, and that prevents a lot of us from doing our best work and leaning into our too muchness. So what I really want to encourage women to do, if you're listening to this, is to take messy action, meaning you are going to move forward. You're going to speak up in some capacity. Allow yourself to be imperfect at it. But this is where our community comes in. We need other women to say, okay, I got you. It was imperfect, and we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to tweak this. We're going to help you with this. We're going to be a soft place for you to find some respite before you go back out there. And that's where those two intersect, the courage to find our voice and the community to support us. Those two are vital. And that's what we saw on the call last night.
Wasn't that an amazing call? Wasn't that an amazing call? So I have spent a lifetime trying not to cry. I was in corporate America, never let them see you sweat, never let them see you cry. I was taught, if you, as a child, no tears here, if you give you something to cry about, right? And I started bawling from the time Glennon Doyle started speaking, and then Pink showed up, and then Connie Britton was there, and I just bawled through almost the whole thing. And I have given myself permission in this last few years to just say, I have tears. And then I would get shamed on social media for white women tears. And I'm like, do not underestimate the value of white woman tears, because beneath the tears is a rage that fuels true, consistent, committed action. If you can't let yourself feel all of it, you won't be able to feel any of it. And we are so afraid of not being perfect, good little girls and not making waves that we don't let even that surface.
This is a really good point when it comes to what I've learned in the Too Much Woman movement, because I too identify as a too sensitive and too emotional little girl. I talk about that in my book, because my whole life, I was told that that was what was wrong with me. And my mother, with good intention, said to me, it is a tough world out there. You need to be strong. You know, you can't get emotional or get upset or feel super sensitive if someone looks at you the wrong way or says the wrong thing. I understand her intention. What I've learned since then, healing that part of my Too Much Woman story, is that my sensitivity is my superpower. It literally makes me phenomenal at my job, at what I do. It helps me tune into people, feel connected to me. People have an understanding that they can trust me because I'm able to tune into that. And as you said, if we can't feel one thing, we can't feel anything. And what's fascinating is all feelings flow from the same faucet. So imagine a hose outside, and we decide we are going to cramp the hose, bend the hose so that we don't feel sadness or we don't get emotional, right? We're just going to cramp the hose. But when we cramp that hose, what we're also doing is we're stifling all the other emotions because they flow from the same space. So a lot of women who have hardened themselves to be tougher, understandably, you know, to be stronger, to appear independent and fierce, for good reason, what they've done is they've also cramped their ability to feel pleasure, to feel softness, to feel vulnerable, to allow people to help them, to receive, right? Because they've cramped all of the feelings. And I think that's such an important point when it comes to leadership and what we need to do in today's day and age. Whatever your occupation is, however you're contributing, whether you're a mother at home or whether you're an entrepreneur or whatever you do, understanding that tapping into all of our feelings is actually going to benefit us. And so I think that's a huge component of leadership that we just don't talk about because it's under a patriarchy, that's unacceptable for men.
Right. And it is the way that, you know, I just heard the biggest on day 2 of Kamala's campaign, the DEI. Oh, she was a DEI hire. And I was like, well, you know, it doesn't matter what color you are. We've all been discounted as women in the workplace. We have that same experience. We have that same diminished. We have been diminished for our feminine attributes.
Well, you know what's so funny? I did a post the other day that is so interesting. You know, Kamala, the first response to her candidacy was a criticism over her laugh, right? She just laughs too much, or her laugh is weird, or like something crazy, like she's just too happy and nobody's going to take her seriously. If we think back to Hillary Clinton, she was too serious and not personable enough. She just came across as a bitch and not trustworthy. If we look at Serena Williams, you know, she gets too emotional on the tennis court, that discredits. We're always looking to discredit women based on these characteristics that are attributed to feminine qualities. No one would ever say that about a male candidate or male leader. They just don't get criticized in the same way. And so, to your point, what it does is it just dismisses her qualities, it dismisses her brilliance, it diminishes her. And usually the criticism of a woman is about how she dresses, what she wears, how she holds her hair, her cleavage, her weight, right? Which again objectifies her, diminishes her as a person and her contribution and what she brings to the table, and just creates this story that she is an object to be scrutinized. And we simply don't do the same thing to men in leadership.
I had a conversation with a woman just a couple of days ago, and when she woke up to social media doing some what she called slut shaming of Kamala, and she was ready to pull completely out of all things political, including not voting, because she just didn't know if she could deal with the level of misogyny and attack and racism that's going to come. And she said, I don't know why. And she was in tears like me. And she said, I don't know why the tears. And I said, because we have all been at some level diminished. And when they do that to her, they do it to us, and they do it to our daughters. It is personal.
It's so personal.
Personal.
In my Too Much Woman speech the one that went viral that I referred to, I shared examples of my experience as a Too Much Woman. And one of the turning point actually for me to embrace my too muchness came at a point in my career where, as a speaker, this is 20 years into public speaking. And the public speaking world has changed quite a lot, especially during the pandemic. But at the time, it was certainly, and I think still in many ways, it's a white man's industry. And so I was a young white woman, in my 20s when I started, and I was clearly set on making my mark. So what I did to combat that at the time was man up. I would wear my hair in a slick bun. I wore glasses. I've never worn glasses. I don't even have a prescription, but I bought fake glasses. I would wear these like suits with broad shoulders, the shoulder pads. I would bind my breasts. I would bind them and literally wear minimizers to hide my femininity, because I thought, if I'm going to be taken seriously in this men's game, then I need to play like a man. And most of us are taught that. But what happened on one very pivotal moment, I was on a stage. It was the biggest speaking opportunity up until that point. I was on a stage and there were 12 other men speaking. I was the only woman. And I prepared so hard for that speech because I wanted to prove that I was worthy of speaking on that stage, that I had something to say. And I knocked that speech out of the park to a standing ovation. And it was a sea of over 5,000 men, mostly men. I walked off that stage. I felt so proud. I felt like I had achieved something. I had proven something. I took one for the women's team. Like, I just was so proud of that fact. And out in the parking lot, one of the audience members came up and approached me and asked if he could walk me to my car. And I will never forget the pivotal moment where he grabbed my elbow and he pulled me close and he sexually, verbally assaulted me, implying that, it was my sexuality, that the fact that I looked like a librarian, that turned him on. And that pivotal moment changed everything to me. And I remember that drive home in the car. I opened the windows, tears were flying, and I thought, here I am trying so hard to fit into this mold, to keep myself safe in a man's world. No longer. I'm a woman with breasts. I am a woman with curves. I'm a woman. And that is not going to be a problem any longer. I'm not going to feign being a man to be accepted. So that was a pivotal point for me in my journey. And now I show up as I am. I get tons of criticism for my skin, for my breasts, for my body, for my hair, for my nose. That's okay. We are changing the story. We are changing the story and we're doing it together.
So talk to me how to handle criticism. Yeah, that was a pivotal point. What was the process like for you? Did you have to change the places you chose to speak, or how did you navigate that transition?
This is a whole masterclass, but I will tell you some crucial points. So when it comes to criticism, number one is we have to evaluate who we're going to take criticism from. Criticism doesn't tell us as much about ourselves as it tells us about our audience and how we're being received. So, there are a handful of people who I really value their feedback. I respect how they live. I respect the core values that they live by. They are in integrity. And when they say something to me, because that's what community does, they will give me honest feedback. I will take what they have to say into account, and I will really take it to heart and think about it because I respect them. However, when I get criticism online or live, I don't get it so much live anymore, but certainly online, because people are very brave behind their keyboard, the keyboard warriors, right? I ask myself, is this person someone that I value, that I respect, right? Are they living a life? And oftentimes I don't know, but I can see by what they say, certainly by what they say or what they post or even their profile of what they support, that this isn't someone that has the values that are important to me. And so that helps me discern the who of feedback and criticism. And then the other thing is I really look at, as a speaker, I'm also a performance coach. And so what I help people do is I help them understand that how they show up energetically, using their body language, their tone of voice, their words, how that impacts other people. And so how do we take the impact that we're having on other people, take that feedback in and learn from it? Because if I am getting criticism from people that really are the audience that I want to have an understanding with or build trust with, then I'm going to take their feedback and I'm really going to look at it and ask myself, how can I show up differently? How am I going to make a connection? How am I going to build trust? And so there's a whole process around that that's really important, but it really comes from first discernment. Who is the criticism coming from?
So when you went viral, surprisingly, and your life changed, the amount of criticism that came in would have been exponentially higher. And you have done a master's job. So yes, it's a master's class, a master's job in staying the course of your message, your messaging, and your personhood. And I have watched when I would have withered and probably did a little just because I didn't want to get in the same circle because the bullies were in there. And you have navigated that brilliantly. Is that part of what you do now when you work with women in you do personal coaching, executive coaching? Tell me about what you do now.
100%. So this conversation really has come full circle because as women in leadership, and I define leadership really, any woman who understands the impact that she has on everyone else. So you're a leader if you're a mother at home, you're a leader. I mean, so leader is brushed with a very broad paintbrush. But what I do want to say about that is that number one, the core of what I teach women is how to lean into and build their self-trust muscle. Self-trust is paramount. It is the root system, literally the root system of our confidence. And so we may be really clear about what we want to say. We may feel very passionate about certain topics. But if we don't learn to build and resource our self-trust muscle, we will throw ourselves out there and the backlash will take us down. And so I constantly work on strengthening and nourishing the root system of my self-trust. And I just want to define that for you because people misunderstand self-trust. I know I did. I thought self-trust meant that I just go out there and I'm confident that I can do whatever I want. Like whatever I choose to do, I'm going to just put some focus on it and it's going to happen. But that's not self-trust. That's not confidence or self-trust. Self-trust is the assured reliance that no matter what happens, I will be okay, that I will do right by me, that I will have my own back. And so to your question about how I managed that time, there were a lot of lessons in there. I'm not going to say that I didn't have many tears and I didn't have many moments, on the phone with girlfriends saying, I can't do this. I had times where I had to tap out of social media. I had times where I had to hire people to manage a lot of to front me a little bit, right? To protect me a little bit. But what I did work on, and now is the heart of my work with women, is building your self-trust muscle because our entire lives, we are socialized not to trust ourselves. Mother knows best, father knows best, teacher knows best, doctor knows best, society knows best. Now government knows best what to do with our bodies, right? So we're taught to look outside of ourselves for affirmation and confirmation. Self-trust is, how can I trust myself? And that is the difference for me. That's what's gotten me through. And I work on it every single day.
So last night on the call, they even identified and talked about how white women do not know how to have each other's backs. And that trust among white women is broken because of the way we were brought up or whatever. How do we build, and this is the first time I've ever heard that term, self-trust, and it's like resonating with me. And I've done in my organizational management work with companies where trust is broken between management and staff, between union rep and whomever. And when trust is broken, everything falls apart. And when we saw what's happened this week with first the Black women's call and then the white women's call and then the Black men's call, and I know there's a white men's call coming, it's like, all right, so these bridges are not just being built, the infrastructure for this has always been there. We have been too afraid to trust it enough to put weight on it. Now we're putting weight on it. And how do we, but there are 47% of white women who don't know that the bridge is yet trustworthy. How do we bridge with them?
Mm. So first and foremost, and I love that this is the conversation and where it's going, because in order to be able to, in a healthy way, build trust with one another, we really have to trust ourselves. So let's just take it away from all of this work that we do out in the world, right? If I have a girlfriend that I want to confide in, or have a healthy friendship with, it requires not only for me to trust her, which is what we're talking about here, but it requires me to trust myself. It requires me to know that I can, if something goes awry, that I will speak up and ask questions. It requires me to have healthy boundaries around what is said or what's not, or breaking promises. So the root of every relationship really is our relationship with ourselves. We've heard that before. So the root of self-trust with other people stems from our self-trust within ourselves. We cannot start to build and heal these bridges of trust without also parallel working on building our own self-trust. It requires us to say, I'm going to vulnerably put myself out there with another woman or with a community, precisely because I know that I can trust myself. So if something feels off, or if I want to say something, I know that I can trust me. So that's the foundation. That is really where it begins. And then in terms of how we start to build trust with other women, that's called the mother wound. And most of us have it. Regardless the relationship that we have with our actual mother, the term comes from the broken way that women in a patriarchy see other women. We are taught to be pitted against one another competitively. We're taught that we can't trust other women, that women are catty and witchy and bitchy. And I'm sure all of us who are listening to this have had some experience with that. So while that can be true, the root of that, if we pull the roots out and look at it, the root of that is a patriarchy. It's a system that wants to disempower women by making one another suspicious of one another, right? Not trusting one another. And so that's really what we have to heal. And the way that we do that is calls like last night, being in conversation, allowing ourselves to see what we have in common goals, working together, baby steps, open communication, all of the things really that I work on with organizations or individuals is really about how do we have healthy relationships with other women, because we're going to need them to do anything in this world.
Yes. Yes. I'm so thrilled. Okay. So what else? What else should we talk about? This is a pause. I'm out of the next question.
Okay.
Go.
I get pretty wound up.
I am so thrilled. I am so thrilled for this, but my head is already just spinning a mile a minute because I'm building a women's group, and this particularly now around trust and how to have a safe place, how to be a safe place, all of that. So I'm double processing right now, so I have to take a little break in the middle of this.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's a conversation that we haven't had before. No. And I think
and there has been a lot of finger pointing back and forth.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to keep throwing the patriarchy on but we have to understand the system that we're dealing with in order for us to heal and create a new system, right? So the system is designed for us not to trust one another. It's designed to pit women against women. And when we understand that that's the system, then we can actually have some discernment and say, okay, so what can I do, knowing that, separately we are weaker, but together we are stronger. What do I need to do? And what can we do together in order to open the lines of communication? And this is not just, I think, a really important point that we haven't talked about in this conversation is it's not just about talking to women who are in our age category or our generation. I'm really passionate about cross generational conversations. I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old son. And I think it's so important to understand that we are speaking cross-generationally. I think this is what we're seeing with Kamala. That's so very exciting. We're seeing different generations with different ideas about the world and about women's issues and different experiences and different struggles, but we have a similar vision. We are coming together under a common goal. And I think these intergenerational conversations are going to be pivotal, because it's not just the older women who are telling the younger women, here's our experience, because we do have a lot of value to share. It's also the younger generation informing us. I learned so much from my daughter and her friends about inclusion, about understanding. They give me language and perspective that I never had growing up. And so I think these intergenerational conversations are also important for building these infrastructures, because trust has to go not just with women who look like me and who've experienced the same things as me, but women from different generations who are experiencing very different things.
Yes. And that the training, what happens when, in your case, it's children, in my case, it's grandchildren. But when they can learn how self-trust at 20 instead of 40.
That's how we change things.
What
That's
a
how we
pivotal
change things.
time. And this is a perfect opportunity when these generations are coming together who normally would be finger pointing each other on social media to say, we are in this together. You do you, I'll do me, but we're going to do it side by side.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
it's
I love it.
incredibly.
These are exciting times. I am so absolutely thrilled to be a woman in this day and age at this time. Yes, it is overwhelming. It is stressful. I think what this political situation has done is given us the chance to hope again, to find hope, to link arms again in a way that we are excited about. There's a lot of energy building, and I'm so glad that we have something. Hope is about being able to look forward to something with some vision, positive vision for the future, but it works best when there's action to be taken. We can hope and we can daydream, but when we can actually do something in the direction of hope, that's what is really exciting. And I feel like that's what's happening right now. We can see the vision, and we know that there's some way that we can contribute. And even if the only way that you contribute at this moment is by working on your relationships with other women in your life, or strengthening the lines of communication with your daughter or with your sister or your neighbor, or just it's connecting. If you can do that, then you are contributing.
So with every podcast and every guest, I ask for 2 or 3 resources that you would recommend to our viewers that they can go check into. I've already have your speaker thing, your viral video to go up. Did I see that you are getting ready to publish a new book about Audacity?
Yeah, the Audacity Handbook is, I'm working on that. So that should be launched at the beginning of the new year. Currently, because of what's going on, there are so many competing. I'm so excited now looking at how we can gather women in conversation. So that is absolutely coming for sure. Working on it. We're getting there.
Right. And if people want to find you for coaching or for coming into their organization, what's the best way to contact you?
Go to my website. It's my name, ginahatzis.com. I'm across social media, my first and last name, or just Too Much Woman, Gina Too Much Woman. You can find me. And just reach out, say hello. I'd love to know what you got out of this podcast or what you feel inspired to do. I'm really interested in opening the dialogue. That's where we start. We have to talk to one another. So thank you for this time. It was just so wonderful to be in this conversation. It's my favorite thing to do.
I love it. Thank you for making the time on such short notice. You're an amazing woman. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kim.